Hi, I'm John Fricke, Oz author, historian, documentarian, but first and foremost, a Wizard of Oz fan since I was 5 years old. And that passion has led me for the last 3 decades plus to be the MC of Ozstravaganza, the festival in Chittenango, New York, in Frank Baum's hometown. Last year, 2020, we weren't able to have the festival in person. And this year, although things are coming back to normal in June 2021, it's still too soon to bring the world en masse to Frank Baum's birthplace. So we're doing some virtual interviews, primarily this year with people we want to invite as real live in-person guest stars in the future because they haven't been to Ozstravaganza before to present. Some of them have visited, including the young man you're about to meet, but they all have some extraordinary Oz fandom and characteristics and qualities of Oz to offer. Brady Schwind, whom you are about to meet, is just kind of a renaissance man of 21st century entertainment. In film, in stage work, he is a producer, a director, a consultant. He is a performer. He has done all of this here, abroad. It's an amazing arc of credits, and you can go to bradyschwind.com just to see proof of all of this and to spare you from having to listen to me talk about it. I'd much rather have you meet him and hear his Oz Association story. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Brady Schwind. Brady, welcome.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure always to spend time with you. And I have been up to see Ozstravaganza, and it's such a wonderful thing. And bringing Oz fans together, old and new, it's wonderful. So it's really a delight to get to sit down and chat with you today.
Well, I've given your own special interest in Oz, which we'll get to in a minute. You are an ideal representative at a time like this. But how did Oz all start for you? Let's go back and your introduction, whatever it was, eventually encompassed the books, which isn't always what happened. So take it away, please.
Well, like you, I was about 5 years old when I discovered The Wizard of Oz. And like most people, it was through the MGM movie. And I had one of those little Mego play sets, which probably they have on display at the museum, and going back a few decades. But I loved Oz. And my father had remembered that his grandmother had Oz books. And one time when he was on a business trip in New York City, he discovered Books of Wonder and Peter Glassman. And so my parents began collecting the Oz books, some of which are behind me right now. Of course, the collection's grown over the years for me as a child. And that just completely captured my imagination. And particularly the illustrations, which were so wonderful. There was W. Denslow, who had done the first book, and then John Arneal, who had done the rest of the books. And perhaps I should mention again, in case anyone watching does not know this, but The Wizard of Oz was 40 books. It was the first classic book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which we know mostly and became the basis for the film, which we know and love. But then there were 39 sequels that were written between 1900 and 1963. And they all are as wonderful and whimsical and filled with, again, imagination that just as a child really excited a passion for me. And it's funny, I collected as a kid, and then I grew up, and then I think what is fairly common, once you've grown up, you go back and try to recapture your childhood, and you start collecting all the stuff that you loved as a kid. And then I kind of fell back in love with Oz and the books, and specifically kind of an unexpected foray into collecting was the original artwork. I had an opportunity a few years ago to acquire a few pieces of artwork that John Arneal had done for some of the Oz books. And I knew very little about the provenance or really much about the artwork. And in my own interest to learn more, I started a web page called The Lost Art of Oz. And it began this fascinating, unexpected journey / scavenger hunt that has kind of turned into a whole other little side career for me. It's been a really fun, wonderful, unexpected yellow brick road for me personally.
Well, this is what how you and I really started to talk when you came up
Yeah.
to Chittenango. I think it was 4 years ago with Stephen Schwartz and Michael McCory Rose and Tiffany Haas, all part of Wicked on one
Yeah.
level or another. And we started to talk while they were signing autographs and bowing and meeting the public. And when you started talking about original art, my heart just leapt because uh, falling in love with the Oz books as I did, as soon as I found out that there was a series, which I was 7 by that time, but further adventures of those people I loved was a fascinating concept. And the original art was so much a part of that because
Yeah.
Denslow was unique to the first book, but then Neil doing, I think, 33 of the final 40 himself, that was part of the magic because not only did you go through the page in the text on the adventure, you got to see the adventure because they drew it so very, very well. And at my age, I have been around collectors since the early 1960s, and so many of them had original art or were coming upon original art. And the extraordinary thing, I think you estimated this for me once, just casually when we were talking. How many original drawings do you think were included in the 40 Oz books? An estimated number?
There were about 4,000 illustrations done for the 40 Oz books. And I think in my naivete, and perhaps really in my adoration of all things Oz, I thought, well, surely all this original artwork had been archived and was, living comfortably and safely and accounted for. And what I really did not realize was that almost all of this artwork in the 100+ years since has gone missing. And it's gone missing for different reasons. The original book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, W. Denslow, he retained his original artwork, but he had a number of problems, a number of financial problems. And his artwork, we have newspaper little things that advertise the contents of his storage units being offered for auction, including the drawings from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. This would have been about 1913 or so. And then John Arneal, who illustrated most of the remaining Oz books in the series, he did his artwork for hire, which means he drew the illustrations on Bristol board and then turned them into the publisher, who then kind of photographed them and reduced them to be used in the actual published book. But they were not valued. And at the time, this was just considered kids' books and utilitarian artwork to create illustrations in kids' books, and who really cared? And so it was not really taken care of. It was lost over the years through, a combination of things. It was the firm would move and maybe wouldn't take some of it. Some of it was undoubtedly thrown away. And then a lot of it was just borrowed or unofficially borrowed. And so it's gone scattered to the winds in the years since. And of course, the big thing was nobody knew at the time, we're talking again 100 years ago, what the Wizard of Oz would become. Nobody really knew that this would become this pop culture icon. And no one even was thinking about children's literature as being something that would become what it is today. The Wizard of Oz was kind of the first American fairy tale, as we say, but it was one of the first series of books that really made a stamp and a claim for the validity of children's literature, both from a literary standpoint and a commercial standpoint. So it was just like a lot of things. Artwork is not always appreciated at the time it's created, and it only takes some time for the value to be discovered and realized. And so, when I realized that so much of this artwork was not accounted for, I think that, like I said, there are about 4,000 illustrations that were done for the Oz books, and less than 10% is accounted for. I think I have to date have found 358 drawings. So no one has ever attempted to find out where this artwork went and to kind of definitively catalog what survives. And so I sort of, since there was no one else doing it, I was not uniquely qualified, other than really being passionate and knowing to surround myself with experts like you and people like Michael Patrick Hearn and Jane Albright at the Oz Club, to learn as much as I could and to just get out there and try to find and preserve and champion this artwork and these artists in particular, who I think really have just been a vital part of the Oz legacy, but have never quite been heralded in the way that they deserve.
one thing I loved about, again, as we got to know each other a few years ago and across these years, is that you were bringing up names of Oz Club members that I had known from the time I was 11 or
Yeah,
12 or 13, whenever they came to a convention first. And they were all adults to my preteen and teen years, but they were collectors and they were among those who had original art. And you were throwing names at me, and it was like, well, I know that person, or I know where that person is. And I could say, well, I remember then so and so bought this, or so and so had that. And you had found a lot of this, but a lot of it, as you say, you hadn't found as yet. So we were
yeah,
all able to help pave the road, no pun intended, to check here, check there,
yeah. Well,
and
and it's been a process too of discovery and rediscovery. So, in terms of the artwork that survives, a name I really must mention. Not only was he the final illustrator of the Oz book series, but he is someone who was an Oz collector, and I would really venture to say the man responsible for a good portion of the art that we know that does survive, and that is Dick Martin. Dick
yes.
Martin was a brilliant artist unto his own right, and he was a serious collector and a lover of all beautiful things, including artwork. And when he worked actually at Riley and Lee in the late 50s, he was one of the people that began kind of rescuing some of this artwork that reportedly, there are stories, and some of these stories are legend at this point. We don't have confirmed, anything confirming it, but reportedly Dick Martin, they were saving things even from dumpsters that were just being tossed out because the firm was moving offices and they just didn't see the value in holding on to this stuff anymore. And so a great deal of the artwork that survives is really through his safekeeping of it. And then in his generosity, he would make the artwork available at early Oz Club conventions so that other people could enjoy it and have a piece of it in their collections. And the three pieces that I have in my collection are all pieces that Dick Martin had. And but then, of course, over the years, this stuff that was sold at conventions in the 60s, it's some of it we know it exists, but we don't know where it's ended up in the 50 years since then. And so, again, a big part of my Lost Art of Oz project is to just catalog definitively the provenance of these pieces and where they've ended up so that we just don't lose track of them again.
Well, I have told you the story, either my first or second Oz convention. One of the members pulled up in a station wagon at Oscott Lodge in Indiana and pulled the back hatch door down and had a whole stack of original John R. Neal art from TikTok of Oz. And it was sold here and it was sold there and it was given to some lucky people. And it was just amazing. But again, at that point, the book was only 50 years old, if I'm
Yeah.
doing the math right, 49, whatever, 49 years old. And an extraordinary sense of, oh gosh, this stuff is still out there. Now, one of the mysteries, of course, is that the last of the 40 Oz books, Merry Go Round in Oz, illustrated by Dick Martin in 1963. Is it true that none of that art has surfaced?
What we found is some of the preliminary pencil sketches, but all of the final pen and ink drawings, which would have been what would have been used to generate the illustrations in the book, they are unaccounted for, which
Yeah.
is interesting given that Dick Martin himself was one of the preservationists of Oz artwork. So we're not sure if it was turned into the publisher and they didn't retain it the way that they didn't retain the other artwork, or perhaps he in his generosity gifted it to someone, but we just don't know who it is. So, I mean, that's the thing that's really been exciting about this too, is that this is this aspect of Oz that I found that kind of it unless you're looking for artwork like this, people don't even think about bringing it up. And so it's been fun to see what has kind of come to light. And what's interesting too is that, the illustrations, the way, say, Dorothy and some of the characters look in the Oz books is not synonymous with Judy Garland or what people think. And so some of this artwork, I think has been out there that people don't necessarily even know what it is. And it's been fun to find things that just sort of have popped up seemingly out of nowhere. A story that very recently happened about a month ago. I
Please.
got a message from a gentleman in Texas, and he just reached out and said, I think I have a Wizard of Oz drawing. And you have to respond to every little comment seriously, because you never know. And he said that they had this drawing and it had been in his family as long as he could remember. And they had just sort of dragged it around with the bits of string and tape that you have in a junk drawer for, he said 75 years. But he said one of his grandchildren thought it looked Wizard of Oz like. And so he sent me some images, and it turned out to be one of W.W. Denslow's original pen and ink drawings for one of the color plate illustrations from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. So this is, as far as these things go, a major, major discovery. And the fact that this illustration has been, locked away for 120 years and is coming to light for the first time now is really exciting to me. And again, just a big part of my mission is to get the word out there, because I sort of feel like once you do, other things will be shaken from the rafters and shaken from grandma's attic and basements, and we'll just continue to find more Oz.
Well, you have become kind of an archaeologist when it comes to all of this.
Yeah.
And speaking as an Oz fan, the idea that there are even 400 of the drawings out there is thrilling, because when Justin Schiller, who founded the Oz Club, major Oz collector from the time he was a little boy, he had several original drawings that were sold at auction when he divested himself of the collection. And one of them is the John Arneal drawing from The Road to Oz. It's about this big. Would you? Anyway, and it's Dorothy hugging the Cowardly Lion, the reunion of the two of them. Thank you. I thought that's what it was, but yeah, that is a full-page drawing in The Road to Oz, and the original drawing is much bigger than that. And when I saw that at Justin's pre-auction exhibition, I just about fell over, because it is so beautiful, the detail and all the stuff that shows up in the original art that is not visible, no matter how fine the printing was done. And Riley and Lee took care. Part of the reason the pictures don't look as good in the later reprints is that those plates were run over and over and over and over because of the demand. But you look at the printing in the first editions or the early editions, and it's kind of extraordinary. Please show the 3 pictures that you've got there, because
I will. Although I have a good story if you want to hear.
Stories. All stories are welcome.
So again, this in regards to the piece, this is a copy for my own enjoyment, because this is my favorite picture from the Oz book series as well, John. And this was a piece that I knew existed because it had been sold in Justin's auction, but nobody knew where it had gone in the past 40 something years. And it was a real holy grail item for me to try to track down where it went. And it had been sold at Swan in New York, Swan Auctions, and Christine Vonderland, and everyone has been so supportive in the auction world and in the art world about what I'm trying to do. She agreed to try to forward a letter to, the name that they had on file from all these years back. And it was a total long shot, because she was able to look up that the person who had purchased that piece in the late 70s was no longer living, but she said there was still a P.O. box that appeared to be active for this person. And so I wrote a letter that Chris then forwarded to this P.O. box. And much to my delight, within 2 or 3 days, I got a phone call from the daughter of the woman who had bought that piece at auction in the late 70s. And I had the most wonderful conversation with her. And what I loved hearing from her, she said, I got your letter. And she said, I wanted to call you right away, because if I was in your shoes, I would want to know. And I would want to know that the piece was safe and that it's still being loved and cherished. And, and what's been so fun about this artwork search too, is finding out the stories of the people who acquired it. Everyone has a really interesting story about their love of Oz, or why we acquire art is such an interesting question anyway. But the lady that had purchased that drawing from Justin Schiller in the late 70s, as a little girl, had lived next door to John Arneal. And she had posed for him, not for the Oz book series, but for other things. And then she later became an artist, a pretty successful artist in her own right. And no doubt it was because of the influence of John Arneal on her as a small child. And I'm sure she bought that piece because it reminded maybe herself of herself as a little girl posing for John Arneal. But there was, a very personal story there, which I think which I find a lot with this artwork. But let me share with you some of the artwork that I have. That again, these were all pieces that Dick Martin had. So this is the half title page for The Patchwork Girl of Oz, which was done in 1913. And this is the character Scraps, who is really one of the most beloved characters in the Oz books. I think that Baum kind of envisioned her a little bit as a counterpart to the Scarecrow, and even maybe a little bit of a romantic interest. But she is a total free spirit. She is someone that champions being yourself at all times and celebrating your individuality. And she is just a fantastic role model, past, present, and future. But again, you have that these drawings were done in pen and ink, and they would have been colored in the printing process. But they really showed John R. Neal's intricacy. We'll get to one more in a minute that's even more intricate, and his real talent with pen and ink. This piece here is from Glinda of Oz, which was L. Frank Baum's final Oz book. And this depicts Dorothy, Princess Ozma, and Glinda having coffee, it appears to be, outside in the courtyard of Glinda's palace. And then there's a bust of the wizard over here on the right-hand side. And what's special about this piece is that it was drawn by Neal for Baum's last book, and it was drawn posthumously, meaning that Baum had passed by the time that this was drawn. And I spoke to someone who had been an employee at Ryland Lee in the 60s, and she said that this piece hung in the office. And she said the legend around it was that it was John R. Neal's goodbye drawing to L. Frank Baum, because in the book, this corresponds to the introduction that the editors had to write for the young readers, very delicately explaining that Mr. Baum had passed away. And Glinda sort of appears to almost be echoing that sentiment and explaining something of some seriousness to the two girls. But it's just a beautiful piece of artwork, and again just shows really the intricacy of Neal's talent with pen and ink.
And that became a color plate as well, yes?
It did become a color plate. It did. So again, this would have been printed in color. And another detail that's kind of fun with some of these drawings is that there's some evidence to support that Neal may have initially started this drawing for another book, but he changed his mind and decided to use it for Glinda of Oz instead. Neal was he was a Renaissance man, and a man that had many paychecks. As an illustrator, he was mostly known for doing magazine illustration, but he was definitely a waste not, want not when it came to his time and his talent. So if he started a drawing for one project and it didn't work out, he would repurpose it surely for something else. But
well, it really is. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. But it is really a beautiful example of his Oz artwork.
Well, I know the Baum Bugle has done at least one or two features showing Neal magazine illustrations that he then repurposed. He'd white out part of it, and he'd adapt it for an Oz book,
yes,
or vice versa. And
yes,
that's a clever man.
It was a clever man. One thing that was really fun, a little sidebar, a fun search, a fun thing that came to light in my search was that John R. Neal would use people around him as models for the characters. And he reportedly used two of his nieces as the models for Dorothy and Ozma. And the Neal family, John R. Neal's granddaughter, Jory, she's an accomplished artist in her own right. But the Neal family, there was a rift apparently in the Neal family going back 100 years ago. And so the Neal family that is, the direct descendants of John R. Neal really did not have any contact. They didn't know anything about the side of the family that the two girls who had been the inspiration for Dorothy and Ozma. And I was on ancestry.com because I knew who those girls were, but nobody knew anything about anything about them or that side of the family. And I was literally just emailing people that had them listed in a family tree on ancestry.com saying, I know this is a long shot, but I'm doing this project and I'm trying to track down the ancestors of these two girls that posed for these characters in the Oz book series. And sure enough, a man wrote back and said, oh, Bobby, who was the inspiration for Ozma, was my grandmother. And so I was able to, discover all these drawings of them as children, at the ages that they were when they posed for these characters. So it's just been, again, this incredible scavenger hunt of stuff that's still out there. You just have to have someone that goes out there looking for it, and trying to dig out these old scrapbooks and these old albums. The last piece I wanted to show you is one of the few pieces that Neil did actually in color for the series. So Neil did two books in color, meaning he did watercolor plates for them. So they were not printed in color in the printing process. They were in color, but they were in color to begin with, I guess I should say. One of the books was Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, and none of that artwork is known to survive. The other book that John O'Neill created original color artwork for was Emerald City of Oz, and 8 color plate drawings, the watercolors to create those drawings, are known to survive. And this depicts Dorothy and the wizard, and they've gone to a kingdom where all the people are made of puzzle pieces, but when they get nervous, they fall apart. And so they have to put the people back together, and they're hungry from their travels. And so they decide to start with the cook. So that's what this drawing is illustrating. But I love it partly too, because it really shows what Dorothy and say the wizard looked like in the Oz book series. And you can see how different Dorothy was. Dorothy, rather than Judy Garland, or what we think of as Dorothy, Dorothy in the books was depicted as maybe a 9-year-old little girl with blonde hair, and John O'Neill drew her rather stylishly. So she's not quite the little gingham girl. The wizard, very much looks like Carter the Magician or other well-known, I would say, stage magicians of the early 20th century.
I always like pointing out that illustration, because if you, at the very back of it, looking through the door, this is the book Mom wrote, where Dorothy and Toto and Aunt Em and Uncle Henry move to Oz to live permanently. And they go to the puzzle kingdom, Fuddlecumjig, to show Aunt Em and Uncle Henry around the kingdom. And it's Aunt Em and Uncle Henry peeking through the door in the background, which again is full circle for anybody who comes to Oz only knowing MGM. You can explain that in the first book, Denslow drew her with the brown hair and the braids and the blue and white check dress, and MGM went by that. But for the kids who grew up in the teens and the 20s and the 30s, they knew the short blonde hair Dorothy, who was always dressed appropriate to whichever decade we were discussing.
That's right.
I think there's so many things I could ask Brady, and I know you have countless more anecdotes, but what I want to get to one point, because when you and I were talking about doing this interview the other day, we were talking about the wonderful Wizard of Oz book's reputation as America's premier fairy tale, America's first fairy tale, or the first American fairy tale. And you have, as is your custom, gone beyond. You went to the Lost Art of Oz, and it became this saga that is unfolding still as we speak, obviously. But you have, in your own capability and your own imagination, looked ahead to what you contemplate doing with all of this, with doing with art, with doing with Oz. Would you share? I know it's preliminary, but
no, it's I've been really inspired by this journey, and it really has taken me back to my own childhood and how much joy Oz gave me. And the other gift that it really gave me, I've come to realize, was the gift of imagination. And I think that is such an important thing to instill in people, young, old, whatever, is this gift of imagination. And what we're really exploring doing now is sort of an offshoot of the Lost Art of Oz, though I think it will encompass more than that, is doing some not-for-profit work that really is outreach oriented, that will include scholarships and will include community outreach type of programs. That the basis is using this American fairy tale to inspire imagination, because I think when you have imagination, particularly as a child, it just opens the door. It opens the door to passion, and passion always opens the door, in my opinion, to a gratifying life. And so I really am passionate about Oz and its creators, its writers, its illustrators, and how we can use that as a historical example, and certainly a pop cultural example that is still so loved and beloved. But use that to hopefully unlock imagination and create the people that are going to give us the next Oz, or the next, wonderful thing that inspires our creativity. So that's really what we're looking at now, is extending this to become a real outreach type of not-for-profit.
Well, and I think the extraordinary thing is that you will be able to do that with Oz, because here we are 121 years after the book was published, 82, 83 years after the movie was started. And those people, those characters are still well known, especially if you go from the basic pigtail Dorothy concept and the
Yeah,
magic shoes and all. But as soon as people find out there's more, and Oz has become so diversified over the last decades with The Wiz,
yeah,
Wicked, and the
yes,
movie.
yes,
It's you have so much to build on and so much imagination. Mark Baum and I were talking about the movie After the Wizard a little while ago, and it's a movie that has its pluses and minuses. But basically, the idea is that Oz is in trouble, and Dorothy, back in Kansas, has to help to save Oz. And the Scarecrow, and this is all with live actors. The Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman get magically transported to New York, and then to New Jersey, and then on a train to Kansas. And everywhere they go, everybody knows, the kids know exactly who they are and are so excited to meet them. I saw this at an Oz festival, where the whole movie, where this costume character of the Scarecrow was coming down the street, and you saw him coming into frame, and then the camera moved, and there was a little, no more than 2-year-old child standing there watching the Scarecrow come. And as soon as the Scarecrow got close, the little boy instinctively just lifted up his arms to be
yeah.
uh,
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that there's any other children's story that's as beloved. Certainly we can look at things like Alice in Wonderland or Peter Pan, but Neverland and Wonderland don't seem to have the affinity that Oz does, in the sense that I don't know that we ever particularly want to go to Wonderland to visit, and Neverland exists as a sort of faded memory of childhood a little bit. It's symbolic of the passage into adulthood. But Oz always continues to feel so real and so vital and so
you can be a child in Oz no matter what your age is.
that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's a great way and you can become a child again when you're in the presence of Oz, whatever your age is.
And
And
here we sit in our second and third and fourth childhood,
yeah,
reveling in all of this.
yeah, and it does. It brings something to life, and something um to full life. And that's again what I'm just interested in the lost art of Oz, and whatever form it evolves into. I think there's a power in it, and I just know how it has benefited my life, and to whatever degree I can help inspire other people in the same way, is I'm sure is a greater joy than I even know yet.
Well, I think when you lectured at the museum in California a couple of years ago, where there was art on display, and you gave
Yeah,
a lot of people a guided tour through it, what you're doing here, and just for everybody who's watching this video, please know that it is basically, as they say in motion picture language, a trailer. This is just a preliminary of what we hope Brady will come to Chittenango and do in person next year, or in any ensuing year he is available, because Chittenango is great about diversification and all things Oz. That's the name of the
yeah.
museum and the gift shop. So, on behalf of Chittenango, thank you for being part of this year.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I would like nothing more than to come up and see you and the good people of Chittenango in person whenever that time may be.
Well, I want to thank Mark Baum for handling our technical stuff, and his son Colton, who's there telling him how to handle our technical stuff. And I also want to thank Cassie Weedy, who will be doing the post-production editing and putting in the Neil art and so that people can see it more clearly. Ladies and gentlemen, Brady Schwind. Thanks again, Brady.
Thank you, John.